Elica, you tweeted on May the 8th, seeing the images of the children crushed under the rubble in Rafah yesterday split my soul open. These innocent babies are dying gruesome deaths over things they can't control and because of sins they didn't commit. I don't know how, but a hostage return, permanent ceasefire, a disempowerment of Hamas deal desperately needs to happen now. I mean, powerful words, but when you hear Thomas Hand, whose own 9-year-old daughter was kidnapped and held hostage and put through 50 days or more of horror, you know, it's very easy to understand why people like him have such an implacable desire to eliminate Hamas, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned that in my tweet. I didn't just end it at, you know, ceasefire and hostage return. I said that it's imperative to disempower Hamas. And, you know, this is something that I think is really important to understand when we keep referring to Hamas as oppressed people. They're not oppressed people. We're talking about billionaires. We're talking about the heads of Hamas are billionaires, and they are being funded by the Islamic Republic, who are also billionaires, and they have been giving millions and millions and millions of dollars over time. This narrative about being oppressed people is Islamic Republic propaganda that is designed to target the Western left, because the Western left fall for this this false binary of oppressed and oppressor, and everyone has to support the oppressed. And there's no red line to what the oppressed can do. There's no red line to what the perceived oppressed can do. And so then you ask, like, how far does that go? You know, you talk about people in Iran who've been living under occupation for the past 45 years. Nobody has ever murdered children because of that. You talk about Nazi Germany. Jews didn't go around slaughtering children and innocent families because of that. It's not true that there's never been an observable pattern in history of human behavior that people who are oppressed resort to slaughtering women and children. Yes, it is true that sometimes they revolt against the entity that is doing that to them. And that is an argument that could have been made if we witnessed an uprising in the West Bank, for example, against the military border. Then you can say, okay, well, this seems to be an uprising, right? But when you're talking about Gaza, when you're talking about Hamas, that are billionaires, that are very, very far from being oppressed, that are hosted and funded by some of the richest countries in the world, that is Islamic Republic propaganda to apologize for jihadism. And that very terrorism, and this is what I said, this is a vicious cycle, right? The more that there's terrorism, the more there's oppression. The more there's oppression, you know, and it's a vicious dance. And so unless we're willing to get at the root of this, okay, if we don't want Palestinian people to be oppressed, we have to end this jihadism they're forcing them into oppression.
Well, I think we also have to end what has been a clear occupation that's gone on for a very long time, and it's
a mutual thing, right?
Yeah, the whole thing has to end.
Thing. Yeah, I mean, both threats go at the same time.
Ultimately, I want to see a state of Palestine, a state of Israel, living side by side in peace. I mean, that should be the end game. Exactly, by the way, in different circumstances, but actually similar in many ways too, what happened in Northern Ireland. You know, where they had decades and decades of terrorism on both sides, terrorists on both sides, actually, in that conflict. And eventually, smart heads came together and they kept working at it until they got peace. And people in Northern Ireland live now in relative peace. And there are no acts of terrorism going on. Emily Schrader, let me ask you the same question that I asked Rania, which is this. You know, do you feel genuine empathy, sympathy with the people, the Palestinians, who are being killed in large numbers, the families of these babies, the families of these women, the innocent civilians caught up in this? Because there is a unique scenario in Gaza where half of the 2 million people that live there are under 18. We've never really had any war like this where, yes, you can absolutely have a moral justification for waging a response to what happened. I get that. But when you know that is the population demographic, when half the people there are under 18, they're kids, at what point do you stop and say, we've done what we need to do? We've dismantled Hamas to the point where they can no longer be a threat to us.
Well, the unfortunate reality is that we haven't dismantled Hamas to the point where they can no longer threaten us. And that is evidenced by the fact that they did fire rockets at Israeli civilians as well as Israeli soldiers, 4 of whom died from those attacks from their own humanitarian aid crossing. So that is the reality that we're still dealing with. In answer to your question about empathy, of course, I feel empathy for Palestinians. I don't think it's acceptable that any Palestinians should die, any Palestinian civilians, excuse me. I think it's a terrible, terrible travesty. I would love nothing more than actually what Elica wrote, which is that we should find a solution to bring home the hostages, find a way to end this war, and disband Hamas. And that is a very, very important objective, not just for the security of the state of Israel, but it's also an important objective for the Palestinians. As I mentioned at the beginning, Palestinians are being oppressed by Hamas. They have been for many years. And yes, we are dealing with a population that condones extremism. Unfortunately, there's way too much support for Palestinian terrorism and even for Hamas in both the West Bank and Gaza. But none of that changes the fact that they shouldn't be dying if they're innocent civilians. We don't want to see that. That is why numerous efforts have been made in order to prevent that. Now, has enough been done? I am not a military strategist. I can't answer that question definitively. But I do know that much care is being taken even today in order to avoid civilian casualties as much as possible. But again, we're dealing with an enemy that intentionally is endangering Palestinian civilians, which is all the more reason that this terrorist organization needs to be dismantled. They need to go. And we need to take a strong, united stance as an international community against this terrorism, because Hamas is not the only problem. Hamas is the beginning. And this is what I always speak about, is that the conflict isn't just between Israel and Hamas. It's between the jihadism, the terrorist organizations with the backing of the Islamic Republic of Iran and all of their proxies against the Western world and all of the values it stands for: freedom of speech, freedom of expression, feminism. It's much broader than just what we're seeing here.
Yeah,
there's
no doubt.
Is the Islamic Republic.
There is no doubt it is much broader. Finally, I want to go to you, Rania. I mean, do you accept that the leaders of Hamas are billionaires, or is that something else you refuse to believe?
You know what I see? I see a country called Israel that gets $3.8 billion
don't ask for a different
a
question.
year.
Don't ask for different questions. You've got a very weird way of, every time I ask you a simple question, you answer something completely different. I'm just asking you, do you accept?
Because you're trying to both sides it.
Well, you talked earlier that the whole thing.
Do I accept there's some rich people in Hamas?
Hang on. You talked earlier that October the 7th was entirely justified because it's oppressed people. And as
I didn't say that. You are putting words in my mouth. That is uncalled for.
If you don't condemn,
I'm trying to bring attention to a genocide.
Okay.
You know what? If the Holocaust were happening right now,
rather than telling me what we've all just heard you say, right? All right. Well, let me. Okay. Let's just go through that then. So you don't think it was justified, October the 7th?
I am saying I refuse to play your condemnation
was it just,
game, and I condemn the country that my tax dollars go to, Piers. Israel.
Hang on, you just said...
I refuse to condemn Hamas.
You just said I
I'm not
put
going
words
to
in
keep
your
having
mouth.
this conversation with you.
You just said I put words in your mouth.
You did put words in my mouth.
Okay, so that's why I'm giving you the chance to set the record straight. Do you believe what happened on October the 7th was justified? Yes or no?
I believe it. I believe what happened on October 7th was a reaction to Israeli terrorism.
Was it justified?
That's what I believe. I'm not going to sit here and play a game about whether it was justified or not. That is not my place to talk about.
It was a terror attack.
I am here.
Do you believe it was justified?
It is a game you're playing. It's a distraction.
Was it justified?
You are trying to distract from
Why don't you just answer the question?
Genocide. You are trying to distract from an ongoing, because I'm not playing that game.
It's not a game.
It's not my place to tell oppressed people what they... It's not my place to justify
so you now say they are oppressed
something.
people. Okay.
Rania, I don't understand.
Okay, no, hang on, Emily. Emily, don't interrupt, please.
People. Why
Emily,
would you side with them?
let me finish. So, okay, so they're oppressed people.
You are justifying a genocide.
Sorry,
there is a
Rania,
genocide of Palestinians happening in Gaza
Rania,
right now.
That
is what I am here to talk about.
You just said they were oppressed people, which is what I said at the start. So do you believe that Hamas leaders are billionaires or not?
There's some Hamas leaders who have money. I don't know what that has to do with the genocide in Gaza.
Are they billionaires?
I don't know why you're having. Why is this the conversation? It's
where do they live?
There are like children being bombed right now by Israel.
Where do they live?
Bombs supplied by my government.
Where do the Hamas billionaires live? The guys that run
Here's
Hamas.
Where, I don't even understand. I really have no idea where you're going.
You don't care,
I actually don't know if there's a Hamas billionaire. I don't know if there's a Hamas billionaire, Piers. I just know that what you're doing right now is trying to distract from a genocide that Israel is carrying out.
All I'm doing
yes.
Yeah, all I'm actually doing is asking you very simple questions, and your failure to answer them is very illuminating.
My failure to answer if there's rich members of Hamas? What does that have to do with the genocide taking place in Gaza, Piers?
Oh,
are there billionaire Israelis?
I would say it's
that
got
doesn't change the
everything
fact that
to do.
Israel's carrying a...
Actually, it's got everything to do with a lot of it, actually, is that you have a bunch of rich billionaire terrorists leading Hamas, and they're not actually the oppressed people you're trying to paint them as. They are rich terrorists leading a terror group, and they don't even live in Gaza. They don't care about the lives of people in Gaza.
I know that, Piers, I know that I stand on the right side of history by opposing a genocide, and you are an accomplice to it by sitting here and propagandizing
whatever. You can use any you can use all that bullshit. You can bullshit that stuff as much as you like, but
wow, this is incredibly aggressive. I will give you. Just sit here and bully me, but you're just a bunch of genocide
I'll give you one last chance to just answer a simple question. Do you think what happened on October the 7th was justified? Yes or no?
Do you think Israel's ethnic cleansing and apartheid
Gave you the chance. You're not going to answer. Thank you all for coming on.
I'm giving you the chance, and you're not.
Thank you all for coming on Uncensored. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.